We talked about it a little bit already when we talked about social media, but it seems that the world is moving in the quite the opposite direction of Stoic ideals. We're all plugged into our echo chambers all the time. Instant gratification is definitely a thing. This celebrity culture has gone completely off the rails. Even a longer conversation such as this one we're having right now is almost an oddity in the public sphere. If you don't want to live in the desert, is it even possible to pursue Stoic ideals in today's society?
I think it is possible, and I think, in fact, that is one of the major values, the major reasons why people should be pursuing Stoicism, exactly because it presents a counterpoint to so much that is wrong with our society today. If you start practicing Stoicism, even at a beginning level, certainly without becoming a sage, you will find yourself less into social media, you will find yourself less into gossiping, you will find yourself paying less attention to consumerism and stuff like that, and your life, and I would argue the life of the planet, would be better. When the Stoics say that you should be paying attention to the cosmopolis and never do anything that undermines the cosmopolis, the large family of humanity, people might think, well, who am I to, I can't undermine the cosmopolis. I'm not the president of the United States. I'm not in charge of anything. So how can I possibly undermine the cosmopolis? But I think that you undermine the cosmopolis by doing all sorts of minor things. When you mistreat other people, you undermine the cosmopolis. When you get angry with other people, online or offline, you're undermining the cosmopolis. When you're making bad decisions from an environmental perspective at a personal level, you are undermining the cosmopolis. And it's easy enough for us to keep complaining about, oh, the politicians are not doing anything about climate change. True. And what are you doing exactly? But start with yourself. Are you recycling? Are you moving toward a vegetarian diet? Are you reducing your footprint, carbon footprint? Are you doing those things? Because if you're not, then you really don't have much right to complain about what the politicians are doing, because they're not doing anything different from what you're doing. So yeah, I think that Stoicism is a necessary and very welcome counter to the kind of societal issues and societal attitudes that are creating so much trouble. Now, if you're asking me, well, is Stoicism by itself going to be able to change the world? I'm not that optimistic. But it will change the world at least at a local level, at least at the level of individuals. And the Stoics really did believe that change comes from below. It's from the bottom up. You cannot impose societal changes from the top. That may or may not be right. I do think that we need some structural changes, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, but certainly it's not a bad idea to start from the bottom and say, look, I am trying to do my best, and I lead by example. One of the things that Epictetus says in the Discourses is, don't talk to other people about Stoicism, don't talk to other people about how to be good, just be good, and then they'll follow. Then they'll realize that they can, wow, okay, this guy is acting in this way. Why is that? And then you are teaching by example, not just by talking to people.
If I can ask you something a little bit more personal, you mentioned it during the conversation that Stoicism personally helped you. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I started getting interested in practical philosophy initially, more generally, and then Stoicism in particular a number of years ago, simply because I was going through a midlife crisis, like many people do, right? So it was a difficult time in my life. There was, my father died. I was hit by a divorce that I was not expecting, that sort of stuff. Nothing particularly unusual. It's not like, no major catastrophes. But nevertheless, the kind of things that makes you stop for a minute and say, whoa, how am I going to deal with this? And I discovered that I had no resources to deal with it, because I consider myself, I grew up Catholic in Rome, and I left the church when I was a teenager. And then after leaving Catholicism, I consider myself a secular humanist, which is a general label for saying, somebody who doesn't really believe in God.
Yeah, we're all saying that about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm a secular humanist.
Because it's very non-committal, It
exactly.
can mean a lot of things. Yeah.
Exactly. It's pretty non-committal. It doesn't, you're still something, but it's not clear really what it is.
Exactly.
And when I started having, running into setbacks of the kind that I mentioned, I discovered that secular humanism was not giving me any resources on how to deal with the situation. I certainly wasn't going to go back to religion. That path was precluded by my understanding of how the world works. And then I started looking around. And when I started looking around, I very quickly realized that a good answer would come from the general area of virtue ethics. Most of the Greco-Roman philosophies fall into the category of virtue ethics, meaning that it's a way of living your life that is based on the notion of virtue. And then I started exploring some of the obvious ones. I looked at Aristotle, and then I looked at Epicurus. And both of them had interesting things to say, but it didn't really click. I could not see myself going around saying, oh yeah, I'm an Aristotelian, or even I'm an Epicurean. And then I rediscovered Stoicism, because it turns out that I actually had read Seneca when I was in high school, and I read Marcus Aurelius when I was in college, but I never actually connected the two somehow. I never thought, oh wait, they're talking about the same stuff here. So I rediscovered Stoicism, and that clicked. In particular, the first Stoic that I reread was Epictetus. Actually, that I read for the first time, because I had no idea who Epictetus was. And I immediately thought, why did I not know who this guy was? This is a major philosopher that ought to be well known by everybody. And that clicked. So Epictetus really spoke to me and clarified a number of things, and arguably, and maybe we can sort of close on this one, the most important thing that Epictetus taught me was what he himself referred to as the fundamental rule of life. And the fundamental rule of life is the notion that some things are up to me and other things are not up to me. And a good life is made out of paying attention to the things that are up to me, because that's where my agency lies. That's where I can actually do things. And then developing an attitude of acceptance and equanimity for the kinds of things that are not up to me. And so this basic rule, which is very simple to understand, has essentially infinite applications. It has helped me from dealing with my flight being canceled at the airport, so minor things like that, to major things like the pandemic. During the pandemic, I ended up in the emergency room a couple of times, and that was not a pleasant experience. But Epictetus' rule immediately taught me, it came to mind immediately. I said, okay, well, what can I do actually here? I can go to the emergency room, I can listen to what the doctors are saying, and I can bring a book with me so that I don't get bored. The rest is not going to be up to me. It's going to be up to the doctors. It's going to be up to luck to some extent. It's going to be up to whatever medicines they're going to give me. And that immediately calmed down the whole approach to things. Like, okay, so let me focus on what I actually can do, and the rest, it will be whatever it will be. That single concept that Epictetus told me, which, by the way, you find actually in other cultures. It pops up in Judaism, Christianity, and Buddhism even, is really a fundamental rule in life. If you train yourself, whatever you're facing, to ask as the first question, you ask yourself, what here is up to me and what is not, and then you act accordingly, you're half the way there.
Professor Pigliucci, that was such a beautiful conclusion, and I hate to spoil it, but I'll have to with the very last question. The title of this podcast is Eurotrash, which means I have to ask you something a little bit more trashy at the end. Let me open up the book again, really, really quickly. I have it marked over here. Yes, here we go. Okay, I will just read a tiny little bit. Plato famously recognized 4 cardinal virtues later inherited by the Stoics: practical wisdom, courage, justice, and temperament, which is self-control. If one lacks these virtues, the one is affected by the corresponding vices, which are unwisdom, cowardice, injustice, and intemperament, so the lack of self-control. Which is your favorite of these, of the vices, and why?
Of the vices?
Yeah.
Intemperance, for sure.
Okay.
Lack of self-control is my favorite in the sense that it's one that I suffer from and I need to work on.
All right, cool.